a special meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission of the Village of Lake Bluff. It is February 3rd already, 2021. The special meeting is to discuss proposed changes to the Historic Preservation Ordinance. Tonight's topical area is administrative issues, although we will be happy to discuss any issues that any of our audience wishes to discuss. But before we go further, can we call the roll, please?
Certainly, and I'll note at the outset that we have 4 members of the public with us tonight. With that said, Member Bergman. Okay.
Here.
Member Church.
Here.
Member Liebold is absent. Member Minor.
Here.
Member Nickel.
Here.
Vice Chair Richardson.
Here.
And Chair Kraus.
Here. We have a quorum. We have one real topic for tonight, but as we do at all of our meetings, we allow an opportunity for visitors who wish to address the commission to do so, as long as it's on a topic that's not on tonight's agenda and that is within our purview. Any audience members wishing to so question or have questions of us? Hearing none, let's move into our listening session. And as we did last week, I'd like to start this with a brief presentation that goes over and really answers one of the questions that actually came up in the administrative concern comments that we've identified. And that's what are we trying to do? What problem are we trying to solve? And this presentation is really addressing 5 focus areas that we think are important for discussion and important for historic preservation in the village. The administrative concerns that were identified in feedback late last year, administratively, there's some questions around, or some opinions that the proposal creates unnecessary administrative burdens on property owners. We'll talk directly about that. There were a number of individuals who said believed there was no need for additional restrictive controls, kind of the same as the first comment. And there were a number of folks who said that the current regulations are working well. Why do we need to make a change? What are we really trying to solve? So with that, let's go into the first slide, which is the first focus area. So Glenn, on my iPad, I'm only getting half of this. Is everybody else seeing the same thing, or is it just me?
I'm seeing everything.
Seeing focus area 1 of 5.
Okay, well, I'm only seeing half of the slide, so it must be just me. Huh.
I don't know what I'm missing, so.
It's the slide presentation, which should be on the screen.
Right. I don't know what bottom half, if I'm missing any or if it's the whole slide.
I'm missing the left half.
Oh, okay.
I'm getting the right half of the slide, but it sounds like it's just my iPad. So luckily I have a paper copy in front of me. So we'll just continue. So the first focus area really is the big picture of what are we looking to do. And we spent a lot of time thinking about this. We talked a lot about this 15, 20 years ago as we began to put historic preservation processes in place with the village. And what we're really looking to do is to encourage, and an important point is that primarily through education, the preservation and rehabilitation of historic structures in Lake Bluff. So we're looking to encourage individuals to value or to increase their value, or to acknowledge that they believe that rehabilitation and preservation of Lake Bluff's history through the saving of historic structures is a positive for the village. The flip side of that is we're looking to discourage demolition of those structures. Discourage, but not prohibit. And I think that's an important, not nicety, but it's an important fact of the ordinance. One of the underpinnings that the village board 15 years ago and currently has given us very clear direction is that ultimately the property owner can do what they wish with their property. What these regulations that are existing and the proposals that we're making are to pause a process of demolition for certain structures and to allow community input into rehabilitation or potential demolition of those particular structures. But in the end, the individual property owner retains control over use of that property. So the couple of bullet points under the education focus area, we have what we're calling a Choose Lake Bluff online database, and Glenn's going to give us a quick snapshot. So one of the things that we have found happens a lot is that people, usually new buyers into the village of Lake Bluff, will come into the village. They love the village for what it is. They love their neighborhood, but they want to do something with their house. And they come to the village wanting a demolition or significant renovation, only to realize that that home is considered one of the anchors in the history of Lake Bluff. And therein lies the problem, and therein lies what we think is a potential opportunity to engage individuals and to educate individuals about their home, about their future home, as they're buying, as they're going through the buying structure, so that they fully understand the relevance of that structure to the history of Lake Bluff. That's the online database, which Glenn will talk about in just a second. The second bullet point is that we would love to do landmarking defined as providing a degree of protection and opportunity for community input for anchor properties, properties that have visual impact or historic impact or architectural impact within the village. We would much prefer that owners want to have their property landmarked because they recognize its importance in the history of the village. And the third, and one that we often gloss over, is the fact that many individuals who are interested in historic preservation know that there are certain incentives, tax incentives, real estate tax incentives, and others, if they follow particular guidelines in rehabilitating a structure. So one of the guidelines is that there has to be a historic preservation regulatory body in the city or the village where they want to make their investment. So that's one of the roles, a significant role that the commission plays in enabling individuals who want to open up financial incentives to be able to do so. Okay, so education, and one of those is knowing in advance the history of your home. And the vehicle that we're working on, and we will be populating over the next year or so, is Choose Lake Bluff. And Glenn, could you give us a quick run through of the database?
Certainly. So this is our demo version, if you would, of Choose Lake Bluff. This has loaded into it data from the first few of the village's historic surveying efforts. As you can see, much of town is not shown as surveyed in this application. That was surveyed by the village in 2018, 2019. And a big part of our work in bringing this to a final version is integrating some of that data. But what you can see here is, if you're not familiar, the village since, I believe I'm right in saying the late 90s, Mr. Chairman, periodically has surveyed parts of the village. That's a professional architectural firm, surveyor, historian that goes, in addition to looking at the development history of the village, goes house to house and captures important details, captures photos, and captures an evaluation of how significant a structure is in view of the village's development and also in view of the standards to be at a 30,000 foot level, the standards to be listed in the National Register of Historic Places. So what we have here, you can see along the left, is we go from these green colors are contributing. The light blues are significant. We have dark blues are properties that have already been landmarked, and then those National Register properties in the village carry reds and pinks. And then if we zoom in, there's really two feature sets we're looking at here, right? So the first is from the perspective of an individual property. We can use 700 East Center Avenue as an example. That's one of our landmarks. From an individual property, you can click, and this is a bad example in that, most of these properties have the assessor's photography linked to them. So you can see the photo the assessor has. We can open up the local survey record, and this is an abbreviated version, the original version, if you would, of survey data. So this dates back to the 90s. It's been supplemented by volunteers at the History Museum, and part of our work is to integrate that supplementation from handwritten or typed documents into this one database. But you can see here at the top, we talk about significance. We talk about if it's, in the surveyor's opinion, worthy of being on the National Register. We capture information about what it is and its function, its architectural details. Again, our more recent surveys have more of these details already filled in. And then on subsequent pages, there's information about people it's associated with, or its historical development details, etc. The other part I'll touch on briefly is that there's a bit of an exploratory feature set here too. Of course, you're on a map. You can click anywhere you like and learn a little bit about a property. But we've also have built out some tools that can let you see, for example, structures built in 1960 or in 1970. You can look, again, for those areas where we have the data, you can look at who the architect of record was, for example, for our David Adler structures up in the north area of town. And so if you are just curious about the town you live in, or if you're curious about how your property relates to others in the village, not just spatially, but through perhaps common design or common development, or its contemporaries, we've tried to give you a tool that can satisfy your curiosity. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope that covers the feature set well enough for our conversation tonight.
That's great. And as Glenn said, this is a beta version. There will be a lot more information over time added. Historical photographs to the degree that we're able to dig them up. There will be links to the county assessor's office, so tax information and the political districts that particular structure, all of the village. So who the congressman is, who the senator is, and other like information. So again, we are looking at this as a place, as a repository of information for people who are interested in beginning research of their existing home, or wish to understand how their home that they're looking at fits into the context of Lake Bluff. And the important part of that gets to the second focus area, if we go to that. And that's the actual process of designating certain structures as landmarks within the village. We currently have, how many landmarks do we have? The number escapes me. Glenn?
The number escapes me as well, Mr. Chairman. I believe it's in the neighborhood of 25.
I think, yeah, 23 or 24.
Okay. So we have, let's say, 25 structures, and some of those are Village Hall and other public structures. But we have about 25 structures within the village that have already been designated as landmarks. One of our visions, one of the focus areas here, is to continue to designate these anchor structures as village landmarks, but to do it with a vision of certainty. One of the feedback points that we've gotten in the last couple of months is the desire on the part of a number of commenters in the village to take away uncertainty over whether my house or the house I'm interested in buying whether it is a landmark or whether it's going to become a landmark. And what we are committing to do as part of this process is to provide a tool to identify existing village landmarks, and that already exists. Those are the dark blue in the Lake Bluff Online that have already been looked at. We have also committed that within a 3-year time period, we will not only identify but also complete the landmarking process for those remaining structures in the village that the commission and ultimately the village board believes should be provided a degree of additional protection and time for village input for significant changes. So how many? People always ask how many. And my answer to that, and the commission's answer to that, is that I'm always saying a double handful. So 2 hands, double, is about the maximum number of structures that we would be considering for landmarking in the next couple of years. There are structures on the National Register that we will convert into local landmarks. That's not included in that double handful. But so if we're looking at 15, 20 particular structures, we commit to the village that the commission will identify those structures that we're looking to have in the village landmark fold to become village landmarks. And that we also commit to complete the landmarking process. The village board ultimately determines if it's a landmark or not, but we commit to having those discussions with the village board and the community completed within 3 years, so that right away in the next couple of months, residents and future residents will know 2 things. They will know which structures are landmarks within the village and which structures first will be reviewed for potential landmark status and potentially could become landmarks within the village. By direct inference, the structures that are not on either of those lists will, at least in the short term and probably the fairly long term, not be considered for the landmarking process. So that's the focus area number 2, designating structures as landmarks and providing certainty in the landmarking process. So focus area number 3 really gets into the meat of what landmarking really is. And what landmarking does is provide a delay period before a demolition or significant alteration to a landmark can occur. It is an opportunity for community input. The analogy that I think of when I think of how does this operate, the analogy is what happened 2 years ago with Block 3, where there was a developer that was proposing something on that block, on the old bank block, and there was time built into the process for the community to attend meetings, express their opinions, and have conversation about what the future of that particular parcel should look like. And that's really what the intent of landmarking is. It is to provide a pause, an opportunity for both the property owner and the property owner's neighbors to comment in a public forum on potential changes to that, what I'm calling an anchor within the village. So this focus area, reading the top, allows for meaningful time for community discussion and input on proposed modifications to demolition of historic community anchors. And if you think of what an anchor is, it's a structure that visually represents Lake Bluff and its history. It could be because of its architectural background, its architect. It could be because of its cultural and social history. It could be for the importance of individuals who lived or resided in that particular structure. So that's what we really are looking to do. So let's now go through a little bit of how this might work. How do we identify those individual structures that we need to review or that we want to review as part of the landmarking process? So there is a procedure in the designation of the National Register of Historic Places. There is a 50-year threshold. So for National Register purposes, if a structure is not yet 50 years old, it is not necessarily viewed as eligible to be on the National Register. The village, as well as most communities that have historic preservation ordinances, we're using now that 50-year threshold to be a trigger for historic preservation review. That's existing in the ordinance now. We suggest it continues, although we're welcome to have other discussions around it. So in practicality, it means that if there is a building permit that is requested from the village, and if the property for which that building permit would apply is at least 50 years old, that property by ordinance would go to a review of the Historic Preservation Commission. So that's what's called a trigger. That's how structures come to the HPC for review. Once it comes for review, we then need to ask, is it a landmark or is it a non-landmark? So if it's not a landmark, if it wasn't one of those dark blue structures that was in the Shoes Lake Bluff map, then we're looking at potentially delaying the issuance of a building permit only if the proposed work involves over 50% of the exterior walls. So if a tear down is obviously 100% of the exterior walls, but if there's a significant modification that is 50% or more of the existing exterior walls, and if there's the 50-year age to that structure, then it comes to the Historic Preservation Commission for review and potentially a community discussion. The ordinance currently provides a maximum of 120-day delay in the issuance of that building permit. We're proposing that increase to 120 days, again, to give more time for community input. And I'll tell another story here that there was a time in the 80s, especially, and into the 90s, I worked downtown, and I would walk to the train station in the morning and see a big truck being unloaded, a big backhoe being unloaded in somebody's backyard. And I'd make a point of walking back at night, and the house would be gone. It'd be completely gone. And I'd stand there and go, what used to be there? And I'd go, why did that get torn down? I don't understand. I'd like to know more. I wish I would have known more before it happened. So that's the reason for the delay, is to get community input as necessary into that process. Now, I'll talk in a minute of streamlining this process, but that's the intent and the process for non-landmarks. So the next one are landmarks, and these are properties that have already been reviewed by the village board and landmark status has been granted. So they are identified as landmarks within the village. So if a property owner of a landmark is requesting a building permit for significant modification or demolition, then by ordinance, there is an enhanced review, an enhanced scrutiny of this particular property, because it is already designated as an anchor, as a landmark in Lake Bluff. The demolition request or the significant alteration request, demolition request can be delayed right now for 150 days. We are proposing that delay be extended to 365 days, only for landmarks. And alterations may be delayed in our proposal for up to 60 days. So this is really the meat of our proposals in looking to continue to identify those structures that are landmarks or potentially are landmarks, and give community input, have time for community discussion on proposed demolition or modifications. Now, I said that we want, for non-landmarks, we want to streamline a process because the majority, the vast majority of properties that the HPC has looked at have very quickly gone through this process, and the property owner has very quickly been able to do what they wish with that property. Glenn, do you want to just quickly go through what we're showing on these two slides?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. So these are two mostly identical charts. The axis scales a little bit differently, but the chart on the left represents all of the reviews the HPC has done since it was first truly established and seeded in 2005. The chart on the right is just from 2017 to the present. That happens to be a recent sampling of the Commission's work, and also coincidentally the length of time I've been with the village. So I can at least speak personally to the items you see here on this right-hand chart. So in each chart, the columns from left to right, the first column is those reviews that the Commission disposed of in less than 35 days, which is most likely than not just one meeting. In the second column, you have 36 to 71 days, so that's most likely 2 meetings. And then the third column, you have 71 days or greater, which is most likely 3 meetings. Again, I'm hard pressed to speak for prior to my time with the village, but in most of these cases, I would say it appeared that the request was extended to the maximum delay available to the Commission. So you can see, certainly when the ordinance was first established, different real estate market, fewer landmarks, more of a situation in flux. Again, I defer to others to add more context there. But certainly in recent years, there have been a number of reviews. Most of these reviews are significant demolitions, and most of them have been disposed of, I would say, with expediency from the data we have available.
Okay, if you go to the next focus area, and this is very relevant to the topic tonight, which is primarily around administrative concerns. So we recognize, the Commission recognizes that once you've made a decision to do a significant addition on your house or to tear down your house and build a new one, and I've done 3 additions on my house over the time that I've been here, I understand that you want to get going on it. You've made that decision, you want to get going, and you realize that there's some things the village needs to look at, but you want to make that, we want to make that process as streamlined as possible. So within the context of the trigger, the 50-year, we want to look at demolitions, especially for older structures, and within the process of looking at non-landmarks. If they're landmarks, it's a different story. If they're landmarks, we feel that the village deserves a thorough and fairly and a rigorous process to look at significant changes. But for non-landmarks, we want to minimize procedural delays in redevelopment activities. We are developing a fast-track preservation review process that will put, we hope, the vast majority of non-landmark demolition reviews into the under 30 days time bucket. We've got most of them over there now, 1 meeting or less. We want to have as many of them there as possible so that the property owner can get on with the good work of enhancing the housing stock within the village and having their home become the dream home that they always envisioned it to be. So a fast track way to make this happen so that we do not create additional administrative burdens, that we eliminate any restrictions that might be there, and that we do what village residents have asked us to do, which is taking time on those structures that deserve time and moving people quickly through the process by minimizing procedural delays in redevelopment activities. So that's focus area number 4, is a commitment to minimize administrative delays in redevelopment. Focus area number 5 is one that has gotten a lot of discussion already, and that's a recommendation on the creation of historic districts within the village. We believe that there are certain districts, and I like to think of them as streetscapes. There are certain portions in the village that potentially could be identified as a cohesive district. They are representative, the structures within those districts are representative of a particular time, a particular era, a particular movement, and that it is conceivable that it would be of interest to current residents and future residents to identify those particular areas as districts. We believe that the way to do this is for property owners themselves to initiate the historic district nomination, so that neighbors who wish to provide an additional level of review for changes to structures within their neighborhood can initiate themselves a historic district nomination. There would be processes in how to follow, but that's the philosophical basis here, is that for those property owners who wish to think about their streetscape, their neighborhood as potentially a historic district, we would like to provide that opportunity by ordinance in the ordinance itself. So those are our 5 focus areas. And at this point, I would love to have a conversation with members of the audience about administrative concerns, or really about any concerns in the proposal that we have presented. So I'll open it up to the audience.
So procedurally the same as last time, but I'll discuss it for everyone's benefit. We'll go through and we'll give the members of the audience the chance to send video and audio. If you're not speaking or engaged with us, we just ask that you stay muted so that we can reduce any possibility of feedback or background noise disturbing the meeting. And then procedurally, when we give you that ability, Zoom is going to kick you out, and it's going to bring you back in automatically. So just understand there'll be a brief hiccup as we do that.
All right, do we have questions or comments from any in the audience? Well, do we have questions or do we have comments from any of the commissioners who wish to amplify any of the items that I discussed or things that I might have forgotten?
I can start practicing my stand-up routine if you like.
I think we've seen that a few times, haven't we? It's good.
It's not very good.
Any comments? Let's go beyond administration. There have been a series of questions around financial issues, an economic burden that would be created on property owners. Some concern that resale values will decrease if there is a historic designation, harder to sell property within the village. And then the flip side, had some conversations today, in fact, about what we really need is incentives and not restrictions, and what can we do to make that happen? So do we have any comments from the audience about those issues?
Steve, this is Paul Bergman speaking. Can you just briefly talk about the incentives? We've spent a lot of time developing them, and I think they bear repeating for the members of our audience tonight.
Well, sure. Why don't you describe them? Because I think you developed most of them.
Well, I don't know if I developed most of them, but one of the biggest incentives, if you landmark your house under local district rules, the biggest incentive is the property tax incentive, where you can freeze your property taxes for, this is going to be kind of an odd equation, but you can freeze your property taxes for 8 plus 4 years, for a total of 12 years of tax savings. And I say 8 plus 4 because the National Historic Register guidelines provide that if you follow local historic register guidelines and follow the state, or actually follow the National Historic Register guidelines for rehabilitating your house, you can freeze your property taxes at the level at which you start construction and freeze them for 8 years, and then go through a process of increasing your property taxes by 4 years, or by 25% over 4 years. So that's how you get the 8 plus 12. So if you start out with a property tax at one level, you can actually freeze the increase. Theoretically, the trigger for this is 25% of the value of the house. And people will say, well, gosh, 25% of the value of the house is a lot of money. Well, if you put a big, nice kitchen in your house, you're getting towards 25% of your house pretty quickly. But if you put a big kitchen in your house and do some other significant remodelings to the interior as well as the exterior, you can freeze your property taxes for 8 years and then work up on a step-up basis for another 4 years until you reach the tax savings, or to reach the regular adjusted tax value of your house. And so this can be a significant tax savings. I have a friend in Lake Forest who did this with his house. It's a Stanley Anderson house. For those who know my background with Stanley Anderson. And he said that over the 12-year period, he was assuming that he was going to save about $100,000 in property taxes. So, granted, that's Lake Forest, but there are significant tax savings to be had. In addition to that, there are building permit discounts that are available and other fee waivers that are available from the village. So, if you landmark a house, you can work the various applications for this and work up a significant amount of savings. The building permit tax, or the building permit fees, provide you immediate upfront savings, and then the tax savings occur over a period of time. So it's there are a series of benefits that go on over a long period of time. So I will offer that up to everybody in the audience.
Thanks. And they can be significant, and we have had a number of our landmarks where the property owner or a new buyer, either a new resident in the village or someone buying a new house, came to the village and asked to be landmarked just to take advantage of these tax incentives.
Yes.
And reduced fees. So it is a real opportunity for individuals who are looking to preserve an anchor structure within the village. Something else that Paul said that I think is important, you referred to redoing your kitchen. It's critical to understand that when we're talking about reviews of historic structures, we're looking at streetscape. We're looking at the exterior of a structure. We are not at all, we don't look at all what happens to the interior. I know lots of folks, myself included, have pretty much changed over time the entire interior layout of the home, and that's just fine. Putting well-crafted additions onto structures, especially if they are in the rear or that are not completely visible or modestly visible from the front, are fine as well. What we're really looking to maintain is that streetscape, that visual image of Lake Bluff. Third thing that came to mind, and then we'll pause again.
Let me add one more point to that.
Sure.
Going through the process of working with a landmarked house and working with the National Historic Register guidelines, you end up dealing with the what's called the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office down in Springfield, to make sure that you're remodeling at least the exterior of the house along those guidelines. And we had a house that came before us, I will just simply say on Scranton Avenue, where the State Historic Preservation Officer suggested, actually, first off, the family was looking to move the front door of their house. And normally this would be considered an enormous change to a historic house, but they were able to show that the house, the front door had moved around on a great big large porch over time. And the Historic Preservation Officer had several recommendations with regards to moving the door and also the placement of windows. That required a return trip back to the HPC. And when it came back to us, we were able to wholeheartedly agree with the State Historic Preservation Officer and then add our comments, which he then agreed with. And so it became very much a collaborative process and worked to improve the homeowner's appreciation of their house and certainly improve the homeowner's plan for remodeling the floor plan of their house. And so they have a much nicer, much more preferred circulation area on the first floor of their house. So I want to say that this is not at all an antagonistic or difficult process to go through. And that's my comment.
Thanks. The last thing that I wanted to mention is we've talked about the historic surveys. There have been 4 in the village. First one was 1998. Most recent one was 2019. All 4 of those are on the village website, and they actually make for some pretty interesting reading. It's a little tortured to get to them. You go to the main website, you hit the administration tab. Then when you get a pop down, you hit historic preservation. And then over on the left side of the screen, you'll have you'll actually have all the information Paul talked about financial incentives. Plus you'll have links to all of the surveys that form the basis for Lake Bluff Online. So it's actually, if it gets really cold and you don't want to go outside and you don't want to watch the Super Bowl, it might be an interesting thing to look at. Some very interesting reading. Okay, do we have any other comments from our audience?
Hi, it's Deb Fisher, and I was just going to listen in tonight, but with the opportunity, I would have a couple questions. Help me understand, Steve, I thought you said earlier in the presentation that one of the reasons for going through some of the changes would be to allow people to qualify for some of the tax incentives and such. Now I'm hearing that people have already done it and qualified for tax incentives. Is there something I'm misunderstanding, or?
We are not proposing changes in incentives. Those incentives exist. They exist right now. And there have been a number of property owners that have taken advantage of those incentives. We keep trying. What we're looking to do is to publicize, to do a better job of education in identifying, especially to our landmarks, the financial benefit of, if they are looking for modifications to their home, the financial benefit of doing it under the landmark status. But it's not a change, it's merely refocusing an educational initiative.
Okay, so I guess, but I'm pretty familiar with those, and I admit I've tried to encourage people over time to look at those. I can't frankly say that between Lake Bluff and Lake Forest, anyone ever went through with it because they ended up looking at the handcuffs that were involved in terms of the review process and things like that. So, but I think I misunderstood then something you said earlier, that to qualify for those, I thought that was part of the reason that you wanted to put some of these things in effect. I must have misunderstood that then.
No, that is correct, and again, it is also current. In order to qualify for the property tax relief, property tax incentives that Paul talked about, you need to be a designated landmark by the local historic preservation agency, which is the HPC in Lake Bluff. So
you already have that power.
Yes.
That's already in place.
Okay. Okay. All right. So it's not something new that you.
And it is.
Deborah, years ago, we had Lake Bluff designated as a certified local government entity, which is a process that you go through with the state of Illinois. Once you become a CGL, and then your HPC follows certain guidelines, which includes a review process. Okay, so once we went through that bit of bureaucracy, then that sets the table for people who then go ahead and landmark their house and then apply to the state of Illinois, apply to the SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office, for the building permit review process.
Right.
And then they're asked to follow building guidelines that keep their house within the parameters of what's been built.
So it's nothing new that you have to do. You're already there, is what.
There's not a lot of handcuffs involved. It's just simply following the process.
No, but for a homeowner, for instance, who does the property tax freeze, is it only the facade thing that has people come back and review your house over time, or does the property tax freeze have any reoccurring things that you do with either Illinois or with the federal guidelines?
Well, you just said two different things. Okay. So I want to pick my way through that. I don't want to be
right. I know facade is over here, and
okay. So a facade easement. Let's put the facade easement over there, because that's a whole different ball of wax. And you've got to have a really cool house to do a facade easement. The tax freeze, the property tax freeze, is a much simpler process, and you get involved with that when you're remodeling your house, when you're revising.
Right, but do they come back over time and do anything, or not? It's only property tax facade easement that they come back over time, correct?
The facade easement is an annual review. And
right.
That's over that way.
Right.
That's a big problem. That's a big thing. It's important, but it's a big thing. The property tax piece monitors your remodeling process when you're in the planning process.
And then it's done, correct?
Okay?
Okay.
Both of them are still looking at, are you trying to put a big glass box, mid-century modern addition, on the side of your 1905 Victorian house?
Right. No, I understand that. I just was asking.
Yeah.
That also had lingering check-ins and things like that.
Well, there's not a lot of handcuffs involved. It's a process. You do have to come through the hoops. It's a process. But if you have a decent builder, you're able to check off, the building, the siding material is right, the windows are appropriate, yada, yada, like that, and all goes to the races.
Okay.
Deborah, could I jump in here?
Sure.
Say that I think maybe what you're referring to when you talked about handcuffs, or whatever term it was that you used, is that there is a time element involved in getting the landmark designation, and then if the house is 50 years old or older, it would go through a process anyway for any kind of changes that you wanted to make to the house, and those things are already in place as well, under current statutes.
Right.
So
But on a shorter time frame.
I think what you're maybe talking about is that, you know, somebody would not be able to close on, you know, March 1st and have it's, you know,
Right.
on March 15th and construction start on March 20th. That probably is not going to happen in an older home.
Right. Right.
Is that, I mean, am I right? Is that what
That is a part of it, definitely.
some of your
Yeah,
potential?
that is definitely a part of it. Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. And also because I think that, you know, one thing I'd like you all to consider is, let's say that you do have a landmark house and it's worthy of the 365-day review process. From the real estate kind of perspective, let's say that the seller decides to put it on the market, a buyer comes along, they're interested, but only if they could do what it is that they're looking to do and such. So then the buyer has to agree potentially to last out that 365-day process, and the seller needs to carry the house for that time period. You know, I was involved in one a few years back that the HPC was good and generous, and granted, this is when we're obviously on the shorter time frame even, but it was a seller that physically had some health issues, could not live in the house any longer. The house had multiple stairs and it was just impossible to live in longer. Put the house on the market. The purchaser came along and said, I want it, but I definitely want to take it down. I'm interested in the property. It's beautiful. It's on a ravine. And I know I am not, no matter how long you make me talk to anybody, I'm not planning to keep the house. So the village or the HPC did in that instance allow the time period to be shortened, which was very generous and everything. But, you know, I suppose it didn't have to have happened that way. You know, luckily it was not as extended, but just be aware that, you know, there certainly can be instances where the buyer has no intention of keeping that property regardless. You know, we've got some beautiful property here as well as we have beautiful houses. And some people may well be, I want this, but I want a different house here. So it does potentially, I think, set up a financial hardship situation, that just be aware that I think can happen. And then I guess my only other question.
I understand that that people on this commission and people who are interested in historic preservation in the first place are somewhat at odds with the real estate community, because historic preservation is necessarily a push-pull between, you know, preserving what's deemed historic by a certain group of people and preserving owners' rights. And believe me, I do get all of that. The flip side to what you're saying is, and we've all seen this happen in Lake Forest and Lake Bluff and probably all up and down the North Shore, where somebody comes in and says, oh, I love this property, you know, and they just change it around. I'm going to, you know, make this house what I want and live in it forever. They come in and do anything from minor revisions to a complete tear down in one case just around the corner from me, and 2 years later they're out of there. And meanwhile, Lake Bluff is left with a big gap and a house that was historically significant and was part of a streetscape and an ensemble that is now an empty lot. And so, you know, what we're trying to do here is reach a balance between those two things, and I do realize that's a fraught process.
Right. And I'm just saying the other side, just so that it's out there on the table, kind of. And then the only other question that I had was just whether you guys had given any more thought to inviting owners of that double handful or double fistful of, you know, owners of houses who already have purchased and invested here. I mean, I think I definitely applaud wanting to have the expectation set for buyers of homes coming here so that they understand. But if indeed it is 20-ish houses that most likely are in the blue screen or whatever on the beta version of that survey, I would really love for those homeowners to be involved in these discussions. You know, I know there's 2 more discussions to come, so just to make sure not everybody's on Facebook, not everybody's on email lists and constant contact and things like that. So just to make sure that everybody who is a potential landmark is involved and is aware that this conversation is being had. Because I think that, you know, as much as I also, you know, think it's great to cater to the buyers who may move here, these other people, the residents, have already invested here and, you know, may well have invested decades, you know, in the community and everything. So I would hate for them to be blindsided that, oh my gosh, I had no idea that my house was a potential and, you know, that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, we had talked about that extensively last week, and we're still noodling over the process of how to make that happen.
Okay.
My own personal view of that is that the double handful. At some point, I'm going to regret ever having said that.
I'm going to use that forever.
Double handful. Yeah. I would think the vast majority of people who are currently in those homes, and they're beautifully maintained. They know they're historic. They know the position. They may not wish to be landmarked for other reasons that we need to think about. So from one perspective, I'm less concerned about a negative action happening in the short term with current property owners, because I think that they value their property and value the place of that property in the image of the village, than I am with new buyers coming in who may not understand. But an absolutely valid point, they need to be contacted. It's just when and how we do it. I think that's one of the positive, tangible outcomes of these discussions.
Right.
I strongly agree with that statement. If you've been in the village for 10, 15, 20 years in one of these, you know, double handful of houses, you already know that you live in a nice old clunker of a house, and that it's got some significant value to the neighborhood, to the, you know, just the street that you're on, or to the entire village that you're on. The stories have circulated. You've heard, you know, people have told you this and that about your house and things like that. People tend to buy houses like that because they're interested in old houses like that. And then finally, for the people who have been here for 15 and 20 years, earlier HPC efforts involved our writing to those double handful. I'm not sure if the old double handful and the new double handful match up completely, but we've written to a great many of the homeowners saying, we, the HPC, think you live in a very substantial house, and we'd like to talk to you about landmarking it. And we invited them to come to public meetings, and we had several public meetings where we had Susan Benjamin and people from the state of Illinois come and speak and lecture us and talk to us and carry on public meetings. And we were able to, you know, some people agreed to landmark their houses, and other people said, well, maybe not just yet, and so they moved on. But I tend to agree with Steve. There's an awful lot of people in this town who know that they're in a nice old house that has a significant part of Lake Bluff's cultural, social heritage involved.
Right, and I agree totally with that, but that was one thing that you had mentioned in the realtor meeting, that, you know, but only 1 or 2, let's say you send out 20 to 25 letters, I think you said, but only 1 or 2 per year maybe would agree to do it.
Right.
So I know they're aware that they live in a lovely house. I just don't know that they're aware that the rules are changing or potentially are changing. So I think that would be a good piece of information to make sure that they have, so to say.
Well, the whole real estate market is changing also, you know?
Totally. And
hopefully it's going up.
Right. You know, it is definitely, and I think that, you know, looking at the buyer changes and everything would be another good thing to take a look at some point to see what they're looking for.
Great.
Mr.
Deborah, I could throw in one other thing here too, is that you being an interested realtor, and I know there are plenty of other realtors in our, two communities, Lake Forest and Lake Bluff here, who are interested in historic houses and so forth. It seems to me that the education part of what we're going to try and do would be a kind of a no-brainer to involve the real estate community as part of our education process. And I would like to see, the various historic commissions in the two communities come together with the realtors and talk about whatever it is we end up with as what the rules are. I know they're going to vary a little bit.
Right, I agree.
But just make sure that all the realtors are familiar with what the possibilities are, what the restrictions, if any, are, and make sure that anybody who is looking at a property is aware of that, so that, like Steve has said several times, we don't want to have that gotcha moment where somebody, closes on the house and then finds out,
Right, absolutely.
I don't have the freedom to do what I thought I would have here.
Right.
We want to avoid that, and a partnership with the real estate community is really the best, best way to have that happen.
Right.
Mr.
Janie, one of the things that really excites me about the village's new database is that Deb Fisher can be talking to a client on the telephone and can get into the database and call up the particular address and say, oh, you're interested in, such and such address? Well, here, let me run down what I can give you right off the top of my head. And Deb is going to be in a position where she's going to be able to say, oh, this has got historic this, historic that, blah, blah. Here's all of this wonderful history. And, my favorite smart-ass comment is, Abraham Lincoln slept here, and, she's going to be able to confirm that. And so, that's what has me very excited about the database, is being able to take that, Janie, as you put out the gotcha concept, take the gotcha moment out of it. And so that everybody knows going into at the very front end of the deal, whatever it may be, remodeling, sale, whatever it is, we know the history. We've got enough data to at least start us on the investigation process.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Do we have other? Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to add a couple things before we moved away from the point. The first, which I regret not bringing up at our last meeting, but I know not everyone that watches these meetings is intimately familiar with how the village does preservation. I do want to make sure everyone knows that when members of the commission, members of the public are talking about this double handful, if you would, there's no avenue for your property to be landmarked without you knowing about it. There's a public hearing. You're given, I believe it's between 15 and 30 days notice. Again, I just didn't want to assume that everyone watching necessarily knew that. Something I'd also would note as well to you, Ms. Fisher, this was actually a conversation I had a couple days ago. But today, right now, theoretically, if you were, part of the uncertainty that exists today, that I think is an anti-feature, if you would, of our current ordinance, is that, theoretically, if you are to do demolition review and then landmark a house and then do advisory review, that's possible today. I don't think it's ever been intentionally done that way in the village, but that's possible. And theoretically, that goes longer than the amount of time that a review for a landmark would take under the proposed revisions that this group brought forward in October. I had to talk, not in those terms, but I was speaking to someone who said, well, what if I apply for demolition and they decide this house is a landmark? That's a lot of uncertainty, and these revisions would change that. So just something I would note, since it is very recent conversation. I'm sorry, Mr. Bergman?
We've done that in the past. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've done that in the past. And very early on in the history of the Preservation Commission, we had people apply for demolition, and we declared a 30-day truce, and then went out and prepared a landmark petition, and then landmarked the house, and then said, now you gotta wait out the landmark clock, and then now you can demolish the house. And I prepared some of those applications, and it's a mousetrap. And so someone buys a property, and all of a sudden, snap, what they thought they were buying, and I think that's where Deb Fisher and the rest of the realtors are justifiably angry and unhappy that, you know, they've worked so hard to put together a proposition, and then suddenly, bang, you know, the village inserts itself into the middle of the process. This whole set of, this process of changing the ordinance is looking directly at eliminating that mousetrap, of making that nasty little bit of embarrassment, and it's an embarrassment to the village as it is an embarrassment to the realtor, of making it go away.
Yep.
So,
Okay, do we have any other comments or questions on administrative concerns, districts, financial pressures?
Hello, Brett Warning here. Good evening. You know, I have two, which I hope are quick questions. First, for the big focus area, number 5, for the historic district designation, does that require more than 50% of the property owners within that designation to want that designation, as it's currently proposed?
As it's currently proposed, there is a requirement that more than half of the affected property owners would need to agree in a voting process. We're reviewing how that vote, what that might look like based on some feedback. It certainly will not be less than half. There was some controversy over how you count. Is it 50% of those who vote or 50% of the property owners? It will be at least 50% of the property owners. I think we just need to go majority rule here. It might be more. I mean, some people have said it should be 100%, 75%. We're still reviewing it. It will require a majority of affected property owners. But the change from what we have originally proposed is that we think now, and what we're discussing in the district process, is that only residents of the district that's proposed would nominate it for district status. So it would be the neighbors nominating their neighborhood to be a district.
Okay, good, thank you. You know, the other quick question is, for the property tax freeze, does that avoid, after the freeze is over, does that avoid the assessment doing catch up, so to speak? For example, say if generally the neighborhood increased by 10%, the tax assessment, then could that come all at once, so to speak? That your assessment's going to go up 10% the next time it's assessed after your freeze is over.
So let me point to this funny equation of saying 8 plus 4, so that your tax assessment has been frozen for 8 years, and now it's a matter of bringing your tax assessment up to the current valuation. So if your neighborhood has increased by 10% over the 8 years, I'm using your number of 10%. If it's increased over by 10%, that amount should be figured into this 25% graduation. So you get 25% of the increase in year 9, and another 25% of it in year 10, another 25% of it in year 12. So they're not going to turn around and sock you with a big, punch in the eyeball. It's going to slowly, bring itself up. Now, at the same time, there's nothing that stops you from protesting the value of your taxes. I mean, you could also go back to, you know, the county assessor and say, wait a minute, my whole neighborhood is overassessed, or my house is overassessed, and, you know, we're in a recession or something like that, and my property values have gone down.
Right, right.
You're capable of doing that also. Let me go back to a point that I was hoping you were going to raise with regards to a local district. Having been involved in designing and implementing several National Historic Register districts in Lake Forest, Deer Path Hill Estates, and West Park, it is a large communal process. Nobody is surprised, nobody's mousetrapped by any of this. There's lots of meetings, you meet in people's homes, you get to meet all your neighbors, you're in people's houses you've never been in before, because you're meeting with lots of people and talking about the pros and cons. You have people who are gung-ho about it, you have people who are not quite sure about it, you have people who are adamantly opposed to it, and it's a huge neighborhood process that you go through as you're developing the information and writing the application. This isn't something that just suddenly flies up out of the sky. There's a lot of discussions about it. In both Deer Path Hill Estates, which, for those of you who don't know, that's King Mirror Road in Lake Forest off of Deer Path, and then West Park. Most people know where West Park is. In both of those National Historic Register districts, not local, but national, we had by the time we got done with the talking and the coffee clatching and the meeting process, we then ended up with having very large public house tour programs that went on with that, where the entire public of the area of Lake Forest were invited to come in and walk the neighborhoods and see the houses. So don't think that a local historic district is something that suddenly appears on the radar and you've only got, you know, oh my gosh, you've only got a week to respond or something. No, this is a process that goes on for quite some time. They're huge public processes, lots of people involved, and if you don't like it, you've got plenty of avenues to stand in your neighbor's yard and stand in people's living rooms and discuss that and explain your views and hear other people's views. So I don't want people to think that this is some sort of mousetrapping process.
Okay, no, thank you. And thanks to both of you.
Okay.
Sure. Any other comments or questions?
Steve, I have one. Can only the houses in your double handful be landmarked, or will there be other properties that are not in that group that you would consider for landmark, that we will consider for landmarking?
So the vision that we've been talking about is that the HPC would develop a list of properties to consider for landmarking. A subset of that list, and that's one of the reasons the list is, developing that list is a little trickier. A subset of that list would be forwarded to the village board as kind of a heads up for future landmark activity. The HPC would work through that list in the next 3 years. And from my perspective, that's it for landmarking. For a relatively long period of time, if we don't get it right, that's shame on us. We know the housing stock in the village, and until the next major change in architectural review processes or national landmark guidelines, in my view, that would be it for the village. It's the certainty process that we're going to do it within 3 years. We're going to let people know within a couple of months, and you don't have to worry about it after that. Anyone else have questions or comments? All right, hearing none, we have two other meetings, next Wednesday, February 10th at 7 o'clock. The topic is financial concerns, although again, we'll cover everything. And then 2 weeks from yesterday, a Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock, is our wrap-up session where we'll talk about all of these issues, and the commission will have an opportunity to discuss the way forward in that public open meeting. So one last chance for comments.
What's that date for the second meeting?
2 weeks from yesterday. So that would be the 16th, I think.
Mr.
It's in the meeting notice, so it'll automatically pop up.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, if I could, so it is, oh, go ahead.
I should just mention that the library board meeting is also the night of the 16th, so I will not be able to attend that one.
Thank you.
The one
Any
thing,
other last comments?
I apologize for being slightly off tempo. There's a little, things are a little different here in the boardroom for being able to audio delay and so on. So forgive me. I did want to note in regards to one of more generally about these feedback sessions in regards to one of Ms. Fisher's comments. So we sent no special mail or public notice about these. Certainly we've given them a lot of attention through our regular email list. For example, if you received our notice about COVID tier changes today, there was a mention of that meeting in there. There's a special email list that we established to reach out to everyone who filed a public comment back in October. They all received notice of this. But also back in October, we did send physical letters to each landmark property owner in the village. Just looking through the list, I don't know all the names by heart, but I didn't see any of them had commented in October. Certainly, we're always, if the commission has people in particular they like us to reach out to about these sessions, we are through this process, but we're happy to continue to look at ways to do that. Certainly want to make sure everyone has a chance to know what's going on and to have their voice heard.
All right, last chance for comments. Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second?
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. We need a roll call vote, please.
Yes, just one moment, please. Member Bergman.
Yes.
Member Church.
Yes.
Member Minor.
Yes.
Member Nickel.
Yes.
Vice Chair Richardson.
Yes.
And Chair Kraus.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Motion is adjourned. Thank you. We will adjourn
Thank you
again
all.
by Zoom in 1 week. Take care.
Thank you. Yes.
Night.
Stay warm.
Thank you.
Good night, thanks.
Stay warm.
You too.